He walked down the cracked sidewalk of his hometown with a slow, deliberate gait, each step measured by the soft rattle of the metal cane he gripped. The morning sun struck the burnt orange brick of the old bakery, where he had first learned the art of patience, watching dough rise beneath the warm glow of the oven lights. 65 years had passed since he first tied on that flour-dusted apron, yet the lessons remained the same. Life, he had discovered, unfolded at its own pace, and the greatest victories often arrived in the quiet moments between ambition and despair. His name was Walter Greene, though few remembered him by name. To the neighborhood kids, he was simply Old Man Greene, the quiet fellow who sat by the bus stop each afternoon, nodding to passers-by with a kind smile hidden beneath a bushy gray mustache. He had lived in the same faded blue house on Elm Street all his life, its paint peeling like the layers of his own past, each coat representing hope, heartbreak, triumph, or loss. Most mornings he brewed coffee in a chipped mug and watched the steam curl into the air, reminding him that even the smallest pleasures could carry profound meaning. Walter once had big dreams. As a young man fresh out of high school, he dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching grand buildings that would shape skylines across America. He could see the towers in his mind, glass and steel rising above bustling streets, monuments to human ambition. But life, with its unpredictable currents, had other plans. His father fell ill, and Walter traded his drafting pencils for an apron at the bakery. He learned to shape dough instead of blueprints, to measure flour instead of concrete, to craft loaves that brought comfort rather than structures that reached for the sky. He never regretted his choice, though at times he felt its weight pressing down like a heavy loaf of rye. He married his high school sweetheart, Clara, beneath the oak tree in her parents' yard. She laughed easily, and her eyes shone like afternoon sunlight on water. Together they dreamed of starting a family, of filling their home with laughter and the small chaos that only children create. But Clara's smile faded after their son Michael was born with fragile lungs and a fever that refused to break. Walter spent long nights at the hospital, pacing the linoleum floors in his baker's shoes, whispering promises to Clara that he would carry her hopes until their boy could breathe without machines. Michael survived, but the illness left him delicate. He grew tall and thin, with a cough that rattled his ribs and a spirit tempered by uncertainty. Walter baked bread to pay for medical bills, sold pastries at the train station each dawn so that Michael could have the best doctors. Clara stayed, by their son's side, her laughter now a fragile thing. The bakery became both their lifeline and their burden, a place of solace and sacrifice. And so Walter learned another lesson, that love sometimes demands you give everything you have, only to discover that what remains is still enough. Years passed, and Michael grew into a quiet man who worked behind the counter of a bookstore. Loved the smell of old pages and the hush of readers lost in worlds of fiction. He thanked his father for the life he had provided, for the endless mornings of warm bread and the years of devoted care. On his 21st birthday, Michael handed Walter a sketchbook bound in leather. Inside were drawings of buildings, simple, modest homes with broad porches and welcoming windows, more intimate than the soaring towers Walter had once envisioned. "These are for you," Michael said. "They're not skyscrapers, but they're what I need. They feel like home." Walter felt tears sting his eyes. Everything happened for a reason, he had promised himself whenever misfortune struck. He had believed it like a creed, though sometimes it felt like a whisper drowned by the roar of hardship. And yet here before him was proof. The twists of destiny that led him away from architecture had brought him back to its essence, to the simple beauty of a home where love found room to grow. Clara died 2 years later of a sudden heart attack. Walter woke to the sound of frantic pounding at his door and the sight of his daughter-in-law's trembling face. The world tilted, and he staggered into the living room where Clara lay draped in a shroud of white sheets. He sank to his knees beside her, took her hand in his, and remembered how she had taught him to find joy in the smallest moments. A shared cup of tea, the melody of birdsong at dawn, the laughter of a child chasing bubbles across the lawn. After, she was gone. Walter carried the weight of grief like a stone locked inside his chest. He stopped baking for a time, his hands too numb to knead dough. He stopped greeting the children at the bus stop, his smile hiding behind the dark curtain of loss. Michael begged him to return to the bakery, to reclaim the rhythms that had shaped their lives. And so one morning Walter forced himself out of bed, donned his flour-dusted apron and stepped into the warm glow of the ovens. The scent of yeast and sugar wrapped around him, and he felt Clara's laughter on the air as surely as a breeze carrying the promise of spring. He never spoke of his sorrow to strangers, but every loaf he shaped carried the imprint of his journey. He folded dough like he folded hope back into his heart, kneaded resilience into every batch. People came for his bread, not just for its crisp crust and tender crumb, but for the warmth it carried, the silent stories baked into every slice. When a young mother reached for a simple roll, her tears of relief told him that his years of sacrifice had nourished more than bodies. They had sustained dreams. In his 60s, Walter took to writing. He filled journals with reflections on fate, kindness, and the way life's surprises could cradle you rather than break you. He wrote letters to Michael, sharing memories he'd never dared to speak aloud. He mailed copies of his pages to neighbors, to friends he'd made over the years, inviting them to read and perhaps find a spark of hope within his words. He never spoke of titles or fame, only of the simple human story that connected them all. That suffering could become strength, loss could become love, and every unexpected turn might lead to a path you could never have envisioned. On a crisp, autumn morning, as leaves tumbled like golden confetti across the sidewalk, Walter arrived at the bus stop to find a group of strangers gathered. They held copies of his writing, some marked with notes in the margins. A teenage girl stepped forward, her eyes bright. She told Walter that she had almost given up on college after her scholarship fell through, but his words reminded her that every setback could hold a lesson she needed. A man with graying hair said that after losing his business, he found new purpose volunteering at a shelter because of Walter's stories. They spoke of dreams reborn, of courage discovered in places they never thought to look. Walter felt a swell of something unfamiliar and tender. He realized that the ripples of his small life had spread farther than he could ever imagine. Each loaf of bread, each journal entry, each silent act of kindness had woven a tapestry of hope across the neighborhood and beyond. Everything had happened for a reason, he thought, not as a hollow platitude, but as a living truth. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, Walter lifted his cane and tipped the brim of his hat. He carried the day's last batch of buns in a wicker basket, their warmth pressing against his side like a reminder that even in twilight, there could be glow. He would return home to his empty chair by the window, to the silent echo of Clara's laughter and the quiet strength that Michael embodied. He would write late into the night, breathing life into words that might spark hope in someone else's darkness. He had lived long enough to see dreams shift shape, to watch plans unravel and then reknit into something unexpected and beautiful. He understood now that purpose was not a fixed destination, but a winding road marked by surprises, detours, and the steady beat of resilience. Every failure had laid the foundation for success. Every loss had opened a door to compassion. And every step, no matter how heavy, had carried him closer to understanding the truth he had whispered to himself all these years. Everything happened for a reason. And in the quiet of that fading day, Walter Greene smiled, knowing that his story was far from over.